On Father's Day, my children reserved a private room at a luxury steakhouse to celebrate me. As I reached for my coffee, a young waiter quietly slipped a folded note beneath the cup. His eyes locked onto mine. "Please, leave through the back door, now." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" He only whispered, "Trust me." I didn't understand, but something in his voice made me obey. Minutes later, my eldest son walked into the dining room with two police officers, and everything I had spent 40 years building was suddenly at risk of being taken by the people I love most. Thank you for being here, truly. Now, before we go further, leave a comment below. Where in the world are you right now? Country City, tell me everything. One thing worth knowing: parts of this story are fictional, built carefully for education and reflection. Similarities to any names or places are coincidental, but the lesson carried inside these words is something I believe you need to hear. The Mercedes sat idling at the curb on North Michigan Avenue, engine humming low beneath the noise of a Chicago Sunday evening. I had been sitting there for 4 minutes, I know, because I watched the clock on the dashboard count every second, staring through the windshield at the warm amber glow spilling out of Belmore Steakhouse's floor-to-ceiling windows. From where I sat, the restaurant looked exactly as it always had. Candlelight flickering on white tablecloths, the faint silhouette of waitstaff moving between tables with practiced grace. The kind of place where a man celebrates something that matters. And tonight, according to my children, what mattered was me. Father's Day dinner. Donovan had called on Tuesday to confirm. His voice had carried that particular warmth he used when he wanted something, though I had not allowed myself to think that then. I finally pulled the key from the ignition, stepped out onto the sidewalk, and straightened my jacket. The June air was softer than I expected, carrying the faint smell of rain that had passed through earlier in the afternoon. Michigan Avenue hummed around me, couples walking arm in arm, a street musician somewhere north of where I stood coaxing jazz from a battered saxophone. An ordinary Sunday evening in a city I had built my life inside of brick by brick over 40 years. I was 60 years old. I had arrived in Chicago at 20 with nothing but a duffel bag and a decision. Everything else, the company, the properties, the $17 million spread across accounts and assets that bore my name, had come from mornings I started before anyone else woke up, and nights I finished long after everyone else had gone home. My children had grown up watching that. I had believed for a very long time that they had learned from it. A memory surfaced as I reached for the door handle of Belmore. Last Tuesday morning over breakfast, Donovan had leaned back in his chair with that slow, careful smile of his and asked, "Dad, have you updated your will lately? You really should think about these things at your age." I had laughed and changed the subject. I told myself it was practical thinking. Donovan was always the practical one. I told myself that. Miriam Cross. The restaurant's manager met me just inside the entrance. She was a composed woman in her early 50s, dark hair pinned back neatly. The kind of person who had managed Belmore's dining room long enough to move through it the way a ship's captain moves through familiar waters, steady, deliberate, aware of everything. "Mr. Holt," she said warmly, extending her hand, "your family reserved the private dining room this evening, right this way." "Are they here yet?" I asked. "They arrived a little earlier," she said, and something in the way she said it just slightly too quickly made the hairs on my arm stand up. I filed the feeling away and followed her through the main dining room. The private room was through a corridor at the back of the restaurant. Miriam paused at the entrance indicated my table, a round table set for 4 near the window, and told me my server would be with me shortly. The room was empty except for me. No Donovan, no Rourke, no Sabrina. Just candlelight and the smell of polished wood and a table set with glasses that caught the light like small fires. I sat down and picked up the menu without reading it. The server appeared within 2 minutes. He was a young man, perhaps late 20s, lean and quiet-moving, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested the kind of tiredness that sleep alone does not fix. His name tag read, Eli. He set a cup of coffee down in front of me with the careful precision of someone who had learned to make every motion count. And as he did, I noticed his jaw was tight. Not tense the way a nervous server gets before a complicated order. Tight the way a person gets when they are holding something in that needs to come out. He slid a folded paper napkin beneath the edge of my coffee cup, not beside it, beneath it. Then he straightened up, looked directly into my eyes for exactly 1 second, and turned away without a word. My chest tightened. I waited until he had moved 3 steps toward the corridor. Then I lifted the cup and unfolded the napkin with my thumb and index finger, keeping my hands low and my face still. 6 words written in ballpoint pen pressed hard into the paper. Leave through the back door, now. My throat closed around the breath I was trying to take. I read the words a second time, then a third, as if repetition might change them into something that made more sense. Leave through the back door, now. I looked up. Eli had not turned around. The corridor was empty. The main dining room beyond the glass partition continued its quiet business of forks and conversation and candlelight, indifferent to whatever was happening to me at this table. My hands were steady. I do not know why. Every rational thought I had told me to put the napkin down, order a drink, and wait for my children to walk through that door. A stranger had written 6 words on a piece of paper. That was all. It meant nothing. It could mean nothing. But Donovan had asked about my will, and Miriam had said they arrived a little earlier than me, earlier than our reservation time, which was unusual for Rourke, who had never been early to anything in his life, and the way Eli had looked at me. Not the way a server looks at a customer, the way a person looks at another person when they are trying across some impossible distance to warn them. I folded the napkin and pressed it into my jacket pocket. I picked up my coffee cup, took one slow sip as though I was a man with nowhere to be and nothing on his mind, and then set it back down. I gathered nothing. I made no sudden movement. I simply stood up from the table, adjusted my jacket the same way I had when I arrived, and walked toward the back of the private dining room. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my back teeth. The service corridor was narrow and smelled of dish soap and stainless steel. A door at the far end read, "Exit" in red letters above a push bar. I moved toward it with my hands loose at my sides, and my breathing measured the way I had trained myself to breathe in rooms full of lawyers and investors who were watching for cracks. I pushed through the exit door and stepped into the back alley behind Belmore. The evening air hit me cold off Lake Michigan, cutting straight through my jacket. I pressed my back against the rough brick wall and stood there with my chest heaving, letting the cold fill my lungs, and tried to understand what I had just done. I had trusted a stranger with something I could not name yet. I had walked away from my own Father's Day dinner because a young man with tired eyes had pressed 6 words beneath a coffee cup. I did not know what was on the other side of that decision. I did not know what I was walking away from. What I did know, standing in that alley with the sounds of Michigan Avenue drifting overhead and the amber light of Belmore glowing in the window above me, was that something in my chest had been trying to tell me something for days. And for the first time, I had listened. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket and checked the time. 7:14 p.m. My children were somewhere inside that building, and I was standing in the alley behind it with a napkin in my pocket and a feeling in my stomach that the evening was about to break open into something I was not prepared for. I pressed myself closer to the wall and waited. The window was small, no larger than a sheet of notebook paper, set high in the brick wall of the service corridor, the kind of window that exists not for viewing, but for ventilation. I had to stand on the balls of my feet to see through it clearly. What I saw on the other side of that glass rearranged everything I thought I knew about my children. The private dining room I had left 3 minutes ago looked entirely different from this angle. The candlelight that had seemed warm and welcoming from inside now cast sharp shadows across 4 faces I recognized better than my own reflection. Donovan sat at the head of the table, my table of the table set for my Father's Day dinner, with a black leather briefcase open in front of him. He was not looking at the food. He was not looking at the door waiting for me. He was going through documents with the focused precision of a man reviewing a contract before a closing. My son Donovan was 41 years old. He had my jawline and his mother's eyes, and from the time he was a teenager, he had possessed a stillness that people often mistook for confidence. I had mistaken it for confidence. Watching him now, I understood for the first time that what I had been seeing all those years was not confidence at all. It was the particular calm of someone who has decided, long before anyone else in the room, exactly what is going to happen next. I pressed my palm flat against the brick wall to steady myself, and kept watching. Aldrich Crane sat across from Donovan, leaning forward with his elbows on the table, one manicured finger tracing down a column of figures on the top sheet of paper. Aldrich had been the Holt family's attorney for 9 years. He was 60 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of face that courtrooms and boardrooms both trusted instinctively. I had trusted it. I had trusted him the way you trust a structural wall without examining it, because you assumed it was load-bearing and sound. The guardianship filing is already submitted, Aldrich said, his voice carrying through the ventilation gap with unsettling clarity. The emergency petition cites behavioral instability and financial recklessness. The judge on rotation tonight is familiar with these filings. We should have a preliminary ruling within 24 hours. Donovan nodded without looking up from the documents. And if he shows up before the officers arrive? He won't, Aldrich said. He has no reason to think anything is wrong. He believes this is dinner. My stomach dropped so hard, I had to press my fist against my mouth to keep myself quiet. My legs felt like the bones had been replaced with something that bent wrong. I forced myself to stay on my feet. I forced myself to keep watching. Rourke was standing near the door with his phone in his hand, his thumb moving across the screen in short, rapid strokes. My middle son had always been the restless one, the one who filled silence with motion, who could not sit through a meal without checking something going somewhere, needing to be in 3 places at once. At 38, he still had the energy of someone half his age, but tonight that energy had a different quality. It was not restlessness, it was the coiled alertness of someone waiting for a signal. They confirmed, Rourke said without looking up from his phone, ETA 12 minutes. Sabrina was sitting with her back partially to the window, but I could see enough. My youngest child, 35 years old, whom I had walked to her first day of kindergarten, holding her hand because she was afraid of the other children, was sitting in front of a small compact mirror, touching the corners of her eyes with the tip of her ring finger. Not fixing her makeup. Practicing. She pressed lightly beneath her lower lashes, then blinked twice, then looked at the effect in the mirror with the critical assessment of someone reviewing their own performance. "How do I look?" she asked. "Devastated," Donovan said, and the word came out of his mouth the way a chess player says, "Check flat, satisfied, final." Sabrina snapped the compact shut. "Good." The briefcase contained what I could now identify as fabricated documents, false tax records bearing something close to my signature, a fraudulent financial disclosure, what appeared to be a forged letter from a psychiatrist, whose name I did not recognize. These were the materials Aldrich would present to Captain Strickland when the officers arrived. These were the materials that would be used to describe me as a man who had lost his grip on reality, who was a danger to himself, who required his children to assume legal guardianship over his affairs and his estate. $17 million. That was what this table full of documents and rehearsed tears and a man checking his phone for a police ETA was worth. 40 years of my life converted into a number and 4 people in a room deciding how to take it. I pulled my phone from my pocket with hands that were shaking now, not from fear. I told myself not from fear, but from the particular physical response the body produces when something it is believed absolutely is destroyed in an instant. I opened the camera. I steadied my arms against the window frame, and I began recording. Through the lens, everything looked smaller, but no less real. Donovan removing a document from the briefcase and positioning it at the center of the table. Aldrich straightening his tie. Rourke moving to stand near the entrance, one hand on the doorframe, eyes on his phone. Sabrina taking a long, slow breath and letting her eyes go soft and frightened in a way that had nothing frightened inside it at all. 12 minutes, Rourke said again. "Then we're ready," Donovan said. He finally looked up from the briefcase. He looked around the table at his brother, at his sister, at the attorney who had sat across from me for 9 years, over Christmas dinners and contract reviews, and the settlement after their mother died. He looked at each of them in turn with those still measuring eyes. And then he looked directly at the window. My heart seized. I pulled back from the glass so fast that my shoulder hit the opposite wall of the service corridor. I stood there with my back against the brick, breathing through my nose in slow, controlled pulls, every muscle in my body locked rigid. 5 seconds. 10. I heard no movement from the other side of the wall, no footsteps, no voice saying, "Wait, someone was watching." Donovan had not seen me. He had simply been looking at the room. I let the breath out slowly and looked down at my phone. The camera was still recording. 17 seconds of footage that showed 4 people and an open briefcase and a conversation that made the legal meaning of conspiracy completely clear. I stopped the recording and saved it. From somewhere on Michigan Avenue carried faintly through the walls of the building, and the noise of the Sunday evening crowd outside, I heard the first low note of a siren. It was still far away, but it was getting closer. The siren was no longer distant. Blue and red lights swept across the upper face of Belmore's brick exterior, in rhythmic pulses painting the alley wall behind me in alternating cold flashes. I pressed myself flat against the building and tilted my head just enough to see around the corner of the service entrance toward the street. 2 squad cars had pulled to the curb on Michigan Avenue. 4 officers were stepping out, adjusting their belts, moving with the unhurried authority of people who believed they were walking into a straightforward situation. Captain Strickland led them through Belmore's front entrance. I recognized him from a charity fundraiser 2 years ago. Broad-shouldered, close-cropped gray hair, the kind of face that had spent decades cultivating an expression that gave nothing away. He was a man who followed evidence. He believed in documentation. He trusted the paperwork in front of him. Tonight, the paperwork in front of him was a lie. I moved back to the ventilation window and got back up on the balls of my feet. My calves were burning. My mouth had gone completely dry. Through the gap in the glass, I watched Captain Strickland push open the door to the private dining room, and I watched my children transform. It happened in less than 3 seconds. Sabrina was the fastest. The moment the door swung open, her face collapsed into something that looked so genuinely devastated that my own chest contracted in response before my brain caught up with what my eyes were seeing. Her hands flew to her mouth. Her shoulders shook. The tears that came were real tears. I do not know how she produced them, whether she had been holding them ready, or whether she possessed some mechanism for manufacturing grief on demand, but they fell down her face in a way that looked completely authentic. "Oh, thank God," she said, her voice breaking on every syllable. "Thank God you're here. We don't know where he is. He was sitting right there, and then he was gone." She pointed at my empty chair with a trembling hand, and watching her point at the chair I had been sitting in 11 minutes ago, I felt something move through me that I do not have a clean word for. It was not anger. It was colder than anger and heavier than grief. It was the feeling of a floor disappearing. Donovan stood and extended his hand to Captain Strickland with the controlled composure of a man holding himself together through sheer force of will. His eyes were dry, but he had arranged his features into an expression of deep, exhausted worry that I recognized as a studied performance of the emotion rather than the emotion itself. "Captain," he said, his voice low and steady, "thank you for coming so quickly. Our father has been showing signs of serious cognitive decline for several months now. Tonight we were trying to have a family dinner, just the 4 of us, and he became agitated and left without warning. We're extremely concerned about his safety." Strickland looked at the empty chair, at the untouched place setting, at the coffee cup I had left behind. "How long ago did he leave?" "Maybe 15 minutes, Rourke said from near the door. He had positioned himself between Strickland and the exit as though to block a path that no longer needed blocking. We tried calling him. No answer. We didn't know what to do. Aldrich stepped forward from the corner of the room, briefcase in hand, silver hair catching the candlelight. He introduced himself with the smooth efficiency of a man who had introduced himself in difficult rooms many times before. "I'm Aldrich Crane, the family's attorney. I have documentation here that may assist your investigation, Captain." He set the briefcase on the table and opened it with a sound like a small, clean click. "Medical observations from Mr. Holt's physician over the past 6 months, financial records showing erratic decision-making, and an affidavit from myself regarding behavioral changes I've personally witnessed. I've also taken the liberty of filing an emergency guardianship petition with the court this afternoon, citing Mr. Holt's deteriorating capacity. The filing number is included in the documentation." Strickland took the offered folder with both hands. He did not open it immediately. He looked at Aldrich with the careful expression of a man trying to determine whether he was being helped or handled. "You filed the petition before he went missing?" Strickland asked. Aldrich did not blink. "We filed it this afternoon based on months of documented concern, Captain. His disappearance tonight is unfortunately consistent with the pattern we've been observing." I watched Strickland look down at the folder in his hands. I watched his thumb find the edge of the cover, and I felt my throat tighten so severely that I had to grip the window ledge to keep my balance because I understood in that moment exactly how well designed this was. The petition filed before I disappeared, the documentation prepared in advance, the attorney present and ready with answers. If I walked back through that door right now and said that everything in that briefcase was fabricated, I would be a 60-year-old man with no documentation of my own, contradicting a room full of grieving family members and a 9-year family attorney holding a court filing with an official case number. I would look exactly like what they were describing. Strickland opened the folder. My legs nearly gave out from under me. I grabbed the window ledge with both hands and held on my knuckles going white against the metal frame, and I breathed through my nose in short, urgent pulls until the dizziness passed. The phone in my jacket pocket felt suddenly very heavy. The 17 seconds of video I had recorded felt simultaneously like everything and like nothing, because I did not yet know whether 17 seconds of footage through a clouded ventilation window would be enough to undo what Aldrich had just placed in a police captain's hands. Rourke said something I could not fully hear. Something about my car still being in the parking garage, about me being on foot about the direction I might have gone. His voice had taken on a quality of helpful concern that made my jaw ache from clenching. Strickland handed the folder to one of his officers and reached for his radio. I lowered myself from the window ledge and stood in the service corridor with my back against the wall, my heart slamming against my ribs hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I was 60 years old. I had built something from nothing. I had signed 100 contracts and shaken 1,000 hands and made decisions in rooms full of people who wanted things from me. And I had never once walked away from a table feeling like the ground beneath it had been sawed through in advance. I pulled my phone out and looked at the 17 seconds of video. Then I pushed through the exit door and stepped back into the alley. The night air hit my face like cold water. I did not run. Running was for people who had already lost. I straightened my jacket, put the phone in my pocket, and began walking north on the service alley parallel to Michigan Avenue. Each step deliberate, and even while behind me, the warm amber light of Belmore Steakhouse continued to glow in the windows, and inside it, my children performed grief for a room full of people who had no reason not to believe them. Michigan Avenue at 9 o'clock on a Sunday evening does not slow down for anyone's private catastrophe. I had been walking for nearly an hour back alleys, side streets, anywhere that wasn't a main road before I let myself return to the sidewalk. The sidewalk moved around me in both directions, couples walking close together, tourists with phones raised toward the illuminated skyline, a group of college-age kids spilling out of a bar on the corner with the particular loud joy of people who have nowhere they need to be. I walked north among them, with my hands in my jacket pockets and my eyes forward one more man in a good suit, moving through a crowd that had no reason to look twice at him. My Mercedes was still in the parking garage on East Illinois Street 3 blocks south. I had thought about it for exactly 30 seconds before deciding to leave it. The moment Captain Strickland ran my plates, and he would run my plates, because that was procedure, because Aldrich's documentation had given him every reason to the garage would become a location of interest. I was not going to hand them a starting point, so I walked. I crossed the Chicago River on the DuSable Bridge, stopped briefly at the railing, and looked down at the water, moving black and silent 40 feet below. The city reflected back at me in broken fragments, gold from the office towers, red from the bridge lights, the white sweep of a boat moving south toward the lake. 40 years I had looked at this river from offices and boardrooms and the back seat of cars moving through the loop. It had never looked the way it looked tonight. Tonight it looked like something you could fall into and not come back from. Yet I pushed off from the railing and kept walking. It took me 40 minutes on foot to reach Wicker Park, cutting west on Ohio Street, and then north through streets that grew quieter and less polished as the downtown grid gave way to neighborhoods. By the time I found a hotel, a small independent place on North Milwaukee Avenue called the Ashland Inn, 12 rooms. A hand-lettered sign in the window, the kind of establishment that had been in the same family for 30 years, and asked no more questions than necessary. My dress shoes had raised a blister on my left heel, and my jacket was damp at the collar from the effort of walking faster than I had allowed myself to show. I paid cash for one night. The woman at the front desk, who appeared to be in her 70s and more interested in the television behind the counter than in me, wrote down the name I gave her, Thomas Greer, which was the name of a boy I had gone to high school with in Cincinnati, and handed me a key attached to a heavy brass fob without asking for identification. The kind of oversight that happens in small family-run establishments that have not updated their check-in procedures in decades. Room 7 was on the second floor, small, clean-smelling faintly of cedar and old carpet. A single window looked out over the back parking lot. I sat on the edge of the bed and placed my phone face up on the nightstand and looked at it. It began ringing at 9:47. Donovan. I watched his name pulse on the screen 7 times before the call dropped to voicemail. 4 minutes later, Sabrina, Dad, please pick up. We are so worried about you. This isn't like you just let us know you're safe. The text message read like something she had drafted in advance and held in her outbox, waiting for the right moment to send. Rourke left a voicemail that I played once with the volume low, his voice doing something complicated and unpersuasive in the register of a concerned son, and then I deleted it without replaying it. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. My chest felt like something had been removed from it. Not pain exactly, more like the specific hollow that follows the removal of something you did not know was structural until it was gone. I had loved my children with the uncomplicated certainty of someone who had never had reason to examine the love too carefully. Tonight that certainty was gone, and what remained in its place was a question so large I could not look at it directly. At 11:15, I turned the phone back over and called Spencer Webb. Spencer had been my financial director for 22 years. He was 51 years old, methodical to the point of occasional tedium, and possessed of the kind of loyalty that was less a personality trait than a structural feature. It was simply how he was built. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been awake and waiting. Mr. Holt. His voice was careful in a way that immediately told me he already knew something was wrong. I've been trying to decide whether to call you for the past 6 hours. Tell me what you found, I said. He exhaled slowly. I discovered irregularities in the secondary operating account on Friday afternoon. 3 transactions, each structured just under the federal reporting threshold of $10,000, $9,800, $9,750, and $9,600. Structured that way deliberately, Mr. Holt. Whoever did this knew exactly what the reporting cutoff was. Structuring transactions to stay below the $10,000 federal reporting requirement, I knew this term. It was called smurfing in financial fraud circles, and it was a federal offense under 31 U.S.C. 5324. Whoever had designed this had legal knowledge precise enough to be dangerous. Where did the money go? I asked. An LLC called Holt Legacy, Spencer said. Registered in Delaware 18 months ago. I pulled the incorporation documents this afternoon. The registered agent is a law firm in Wilmington, which is standard for Delaware shells, but the beneficial owner listed in the operating agreement, he stopped. Spencer, it's Donovan Mr. Holt. His name is on the operating agreement as sole beneficial owner. I pressed the phone against my ear so hard that the edge of the case bit into my cheekbone. $270,000, moved in careful, deliberate increments, designed to avoid triggering automatic bank alerts. 18 months of preparation. My son's name on the paperwork. There's one more thing, Spencer said, and his voice dropped lower, the way a person's voice drops when they are about to say something they genuinely wish they did not have to say. The access logs for the primary account show 2 attempted entries last Thursday using a digital signature file. The attempts were flagged and blocked by First Midwest's security system, but they registered long enough to leave an IP address in the access log. And Spencer hesitated. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a murmur. Mr. Holt, whoever tried to access your primary account on Thursday knew your banking password, not an approximate version of it. The exact password you set 14 months ago and have never written down anywhere. Someone very close to you gave them that information. Someone who has been inside your life long enough to know things that aren't written down. I sat on the edge of the bed in room 7 of the Ashland Inn and felt the last warm corner of doubt dissolve. There was no version of this that was a misunderstanding. There was no version of this that was family members acting out of misguided concern or poor judgment or fear. This was architecture. This had been built carefully and over time by people who knew exactly what they were building and exactly what they intended to do with it when it was finished. Spencer, I said, don't touch anything. Don't move any funds. Don't send any communications from the company accounts, and do not speak to Donovan or either of his siblings if they contact you. Can you do that? Yes, sir, Spencer said immediately. I'll be in touch tomorrow morning. I ended the call and set the phone back on the nightstand. Through the single window of room 7, the back parking lot of the Ashland Inn sat empty and yellow under a sodium lamp, ordinary and indifferent to everything that had just been confirmed inside this small room. 14 months ago, that was when I had set the banking password that Spencer said they had known exactly. 14 months ago, Donovan had come to visit for a long weekend, and we had sat together at the kitchen table in Lake Forest on a Saturday morning, and I had been updating my financial accounts on my laptop while he read the newspaper. And I remembered with a clarity that felt like a blade that I had read the password aloud as I typed it, because I had a habit of doing that when I thought I was alone with people I trusted. I had read the password aloud, and my son had been sitting 4 feet away. I did not sleep. I know this because I watched the ceiling of room 7 change color as the night moved through its hours. The deep charcoal of midnight giving way to the slightly warmer gray of 2 in the morning, then the flat, colorless pale that precedes dawn when the sky outside is not yet light, but has stopped being dark. I lay on top of the bedspread, fully dressed shoes, off jacket folded over the chair by the window, and I thought about signatures. My signature was not something I had ever thought about carefully before. It was simply a thing my hand did, a reflex developed over 40 years of contracts and closing documents and checks written in the back of cars between meetings. The capital R that leaned slightly forward, the way the H in Holt compressed itself into something almost architectural, 2 vertical strokes, connected by a crossbar that I always pressed harder than necessary, a habit from the fountain pen my father had given me when I was 17. Small things, automatic things, the kind of detail you share without meaning to with someone who watches you closely enough and long enough. Donovan had watched me sign things his entire life. At 6 in the morning, I sat up, put my shoes back on, and called Spencer. He answered before the first ring finished, which meant he had not slept either. I could hear it in his voice, that particular flatness that settles in after a night of being awake with something that will not let you rest. "I need everything you have on Holt Legacy, LLC, I said. Incorporation date, transaction history, the IP address from the access log. Send it to this number as encrypted attachments. Do not use the company server." "Already prepared," Spencer said. "I've been sitting here since 4 a.m. putting it together." A pause and then, "Mr. Holt, I have to tell you something else, something I found this morning that I didn't have last night." I waited. "The IP address from the Thursday access attempt," Spencer said carefully. "I ran it through a reverse lookup service. It resolves to a registered business address at Willis Tower, 42nd floor. Another pause. "That floor is leased to Crane and Associates." The name landed in my chest like something dropped from a height. Aldrich Crane, the man who had sat across from me at Christmas dinners for 9 years, who had drafted my wife's estate documents when she died, who had shaken my hand at the closing of my largest property deal and said, "With what I had taken for genuine warmth, Raymond, everything you've built here is remarkable. I hope you know that." The IP address from the attempted theft of my banking credentials had originated from Aldrich Crane's office. "And send everything," and I said, "all of it." The attachments arrived in 4 separate files over the next 20 minutes. I sat cross-legged on the bed and went through each one with the phone screen at full brightness, enlarging sections, reading line by line the way I used to read contracts in the early years, when I could not yet afford to pay someone else to find the problems. The first file contained the incorporation documents for Holt Legacy, LLC, filed with the Delaware Secretary of State 18 months ago, December of 2022. The registered agent was a Wilmington law firm that handled incorporation services for hundreds of shell companies, which was standard and told me nothing on its own. But the operating agreement listed Donovan Raymond Holt as sole beneficial owner, and the purpose of the company was described as real estate asset management, which was precisely vague enough to justify receiving large transfers from accounts connected to my legitimate business operations without immediately triggering scrutiny. 18 months. They had begun building this in December of 2022. 6 months after I had mentioned at a family Thanksgiving dinner that I was considering restructuring my estate plan to direct a significant portion of my assets toward a charitable foundation rather than direct inheritance. I had said it casually between the turkey and the pie as something I was thinking about rather than something decided. But Donovan had looked up from his plate when I said it. I remembered that now. He had looked up and said nothing and looked back down, and I had thought he was processing it the way a practical person processes unwelcome financial news. He had been calculating. The second file contained the transaction records, 3 transfers each precisely structured to stay below the $10,000 federal reporting threshold, $9,800, $9,750, $9,600. Each transfer tagged in the memo field with the notation management fee, which would appear legitimate to any automated review system. The transfers had been executed over 3 consecutive Fridays, which Spencer's note explained was a technique designed to avoid pattern detection algorithms that flag repeated same-day transactions. The third file was the access log from First Midwest Bank's security system. 2 attempted logins on Thursday at 11:43 in the morning and 11:47 in the morning, 4 minutes apart, suggesting the first attempt had failed and whoever was attempting the access had paused to verify the credentials before trying again. Both attempts used the correct username. Both used the correct password. Both were blocked not because the credentials were wrong, but because First Midwest's fraud detection system had flagged the login as originating from an unrecognized device at an unrecognized IP address. The IP address that resolved to Aldrich Crane's office on the 42nd floor of Willis Tower. I set the phone down on the bed and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes until I saw light. The emergency guardianship petition that Aldrich had filed with the court, I understood its full mechanics now in a way I had not the night before. Under Illinois Probate Act 755 ILCS 5/11, a court could grant an emergency guardianship order without the subject's presence or knowledge if the petitioner could demonstrate that the subject posed an immediate risk to themselves or their estate. The order would freeze my assets, transfer control of my financial decisions to whoever was named guardian, and could be obtained in as little as 24 hours if the on-call judge found the documentation compelling. Aldrich had prepared the documentation. Aldrich had also apparently already attempted to access my primary account 2 days before the dinner, which suggested that the guardianship petition was not the first move in this plan, but the legal formalization of a theft that had already begun. My phone buzzed. Spencer again this time, a text message rather than a call. Court filing confirmed active. Hearing scheduled 9 a.m. tomorrow. Judge Patricia Wren presiding. Emergency docket. I read the message twice. Judge Patricia Wren. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Aldrich would present his documentation. Donovan would stand beside him, looking like a worried son. Sabrina would produce tears with the same practiced efficiency I had watched through a ventilation window the night before. And I would not be there to say a single word in my own defense because I was sitting on the edge of a bed in a 12-room hotel in Wicker Park with a blister on my left heel and no attorney, no documentation, and less than 27 hours before a court of law transferred control of everything I had built to the people who had built the mechanism to take it. I stood up from the bed. My legs felt steadier than they had any right to feel. I put my jacket on, smoothed the lapels, and picked up the phone. There was one call I needed to make before anything else. One person whose judgment I had trusted for 30 years, who had navigated difficult legal terrain longer than I had been in business, and who would know if anyone would know what to do in the next 27 hours. I found Judge Calloway's number in my contacts and pressed call. He answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the careful alertness of a man who had already heard something and was deciding how much to acknowledge. "And Raymond," he said, "just my name, nothing else." "I need your help," I said. Tonight everything changed. A long breath on the other end of the line. Then, "I know Raymond. Come to the house. Not now, it's too early, and you shouldn't be moving around the neighborhood yet. Come at 8. Use the back gate." A pause that lasted precisely long enough to feel significant. "And Raymond, before you come to me, find Hargrove. He's on Milwaukee Avenue in Wicker Park. You're not far." "Hargrove," I repeated. "Private investigator. The best one I've ever known. Tell him I sent you." Another pause, and something in the quality of it, a heaviness, a weight that felt less like caution and more like burden, made the back of my neck tighten. "Find him first, Raymond. I'll explain everything when I see you." The call ended before I could ask what everything meant. I stood in the middle of room 7 with the phone in my hand, and Judge Calloway's voice still hanging in the air of the small room, and I turned the word everything over in my mind, the way you turn something unfamiliar in your hands trying to understand its weight. He had said he knew, not I heard not. I wondered not what happened. He had said I know, as though the shape of what had occurred tonight was not a surprise to him, as though he had been waiting for this call. I put on my jacket and went to find Hargrove. The sun had barely cracked the horizon when I pulled onto North Milwaukee Avenue, and already the city felt like it was moving without me. Delivery trucks grinding past storefronts, a woman walking a dog that tugged hard against its leash, a teenager in a red hoodie unlocking a coffee shop door. Chicago didn't care that my world had collapsed overnight. It just kept moving, indifferent and enormous, and I was somewhere inside it, small and running out of time. Judge Calloway had given me an address written on the back of an old business card, the ink slightly smeared, like he'd written it in a hurry, or perhaps long ago, and kept it somewhere close for a moment, exactly like this. The building was a narrow 3-story brick walk-up, squeezed between a laundromat and a print shop, both still closed. A small brass plate beside the second-floor buzzer read, D. Hargrove Investigations. By appointment only. I pressed the buzzer anyway. For a long moment, nothing. Then a voice came through the intercom, low and unhurried, like a man who had learned long ago never to sound startled by anything. "Who is it?" "Raymond Holt," I said. "Judge Calloway sent me." A pause. Then the door clicked open. The office on the second floor was not what I had imagined. I don't know what I expected, something cinematic, perhaps. Dim lighting, a bottle of whiskey on the desk, case files pinned to the wall with red string. What I found instead was a clean, organized workspace that smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. Bookshelves lined one entire wall, filled not with novels, but with legal reference volumes, corporate registry guides, and what appeared to be bound financial disclosure reports. A desktop computer with 2 monitors sat on a wide oak desk. Behind it sat Desmond Hargrove. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, thick-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes the color of weathered concrete, the kind of eyes that had spent decades watching people and learning not to believe everything they showed him. He wore a plain navy shirt, no tie sleeves, already rolled to the elbows at 6 in the morning. He gestured to the chair across from him, without standing. "Calloway called ahead," he said before I could explain. "No retainer needed until we know what we're dealing with." "Then sit down, Mr. Holt," he said. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I admitted. "Tell me everything. Don't edit. Don't decide what's important, that's my job." So I told him. All of it. The dinner reservation, Eli's napkin, the alley, what I had seen through that corridor window, the briefcase, the forged psychiatric evaluation, Aldrich's voice announcing the emergency guardianship petition, like he was reading a weather forecast. The sirens. The way Sabrina had asked how she looked, and Donovan had said, devastated, without even glancing up from his papers. I told him about Spencer's call in the middle of the night, about the shell company Holt Legacy, LLC. The $270,000 moved in 3 separate wire transfers, the IP login that traced directly to Aldrich Crane's office in Willis Tower. Hargrove listened without interrupting. He didn't nod along the way people do when they're not really listening. He just watched me still and occasionally made a small mark on the yellow legal pad in front of him. When I finished, he set down his pen. "At the hearing," he said. 9 o'clock this morning. "Yes. That's..." He checked the clock on the wall. 2 hours and 40 minutes. "I know." He leaned back in his chair, and for a moment I was terrified he was going to tell me there was nothing he could do in that window of time. My hands were pressing flat against my knees to keep them from trembling. My throat felt like it was closing around something I couldn't swallow. "The petition itself won't be enough to take your assets today," Hargrove said, his tone deliberate and precise. "Under Illinois law specifically, the Probate Act, 755 ILCS 5/11, A-3, an emergency guardianship can be granted ex parte, meaning without your presence or consent, but it requires the petitioner to demonstrate immediate and irreparable harm. The judge would issue a temporary order. That temporary order could freeze your financial accounts pending a full hearing, which is typically scheduled within 30 days. "It's 30 days, I repeated. The number sat in my chest like a stone. "If your accounts are frozen, Donovan's people can move to have a court-appointed guardian control your assets during that period. That's the window they need." He tapped his pen against the legal pad. "They're not trying to steal everything in one night, Mr. Holt. They're trying to get legal control first. Once a court recognizes a guardian's authority over your estate, transferring assets becomes significantly easier and significantly harder to prosecute." I stared at him. "They thought of everything?" "They had 2 years, he said flatly, and something about the casualness of that statement hit me like a fist to the sternum. 2 years. My children had spent 2 years constructing the scaffolding of this plan, while I sat across from them at birthday dinners and Christmas tables, believing, genuinely believing, that whatever distance had grown between us was simply the natural drift of adult lives. I pressed my fingers to the bridge of my nose and forced myself to breathe. "What do I do?" I asked. My voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped raw at the edges. Hargrove stood and moved to one of the bookshelves, pulling a thin folder from between two reference volumes. "First, you call your own attorney, not Aldrich obviously, and have them file an emergency appearance at the courthouse to contest the petition before 9. That buys us time." He set the folder on the desk in front of me. "Second, you give me 48 hours. "For what?" He met my eyes, and something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of quiet certainty that felt in that moment more valuable than warmth. "For me to find out exactly how deep this goes," he said. "Because in my experience, Mr. Holt, a scheme this carefully constructed doesn't stay clean. Somewhere in the 2 years they spent building this, someone made a mistake, or someone got greedy." He picked up his pen again. "And greedy people always leave a trail." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. But belief felt like a luxury I had already spent once on 3 people who had sat across from me at dinner tables and learned while I wasn't looking how to ruin me. I took the folder. My hand was steady somehow. I don't know how. 48 hours, I said. 48 hours, he confirmed. "Now go make that call." I stepped back out onto Milwaukee Avenue at 6:23 in the morning. The laundromat next door had opened while I was upstairs. Through the glass, I could see a row of machines spinning, tumbling everything inside them into chaos, before eventually settling into something clean. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer than I needed to, watching them turn. Then I dialed my attorney's emergency line and waited for someone to answer. Whatever Hargrove was going to find in 48 hours, I had no idea yet how far back the roots of this thing actually went. I would learn, but not yet. Nolan Price picked up on the 3rd ring, which told me everything I needed to know about him. A man who kept his phone close even at 6 in the morning, because in his line of work, emergencies didn't wait for business hours. Raymond. His voice was alert immediately, no grogginess, no irritation. "Talk to me." I talked. Standing on a sidewalk in Wicker Park with the morning traffic thickening around me, I laid out everything in as few words as possible: the petition, the filing, the 9 a.m., hearing Aldrich Crane's name on the documents. I heard Nolan exhale sharply through his nose, the sound a man makes when he's already calculating moves before you've finished your sentence. "Which division?" he asked. "Cook County Probate." "Hey, Judge." "Patricia Wren." A pause. "All right, I know her courtroom. She runs a tight ship. She won't rubber stamp an emergency petition if there's a contested appearance on record." I heard the sound of drawers opening, papers moving. "I need 40 minutes to pull your financial power of attorney and your most recent estate documents. Meet me outside room 1804 at 8:45. Don't go inside before I get there. Don't speak to Aldrich Crane or anyone associated with the petition. Do you understand me? Understood, I said. And Raymond, he paused, keep whatever evidence you have on your person. Do not leave it anywhere. I touched the breast pocket of my jacket where my phone sat with the video still saved. I have it, I said. Good. I'll see you at 8:45. The Richard J. Daley Center on Washington Street was already alive with the particular controlled chaos of a Monday morning courthouse, clerks moving between departments, attorneys in dark suits consulting folders in the hallways, a security line that wound back almost to the revolving doors. I passed through the metal detector at 8:22, and the guard barely glanced at me. Just another face in the stream. Just another person with something urgent and irreversible happening to them. I found a bench near the elevator bank on the 18th floor and sat down to wait. They arrived at 8:31. I heard Sabrina's voice before I saw her, that particular bright social tone she used with strangers, warm and slightly breathless, the voice she had perfected over a lifetime of wanting to be liked. She was speaking to a courthouse clerk asking something about the water fountain, laughing lightly at the woman's response. She wore a dark gray dress, understated expensive. Her eyes were slightly red-rimmed. I would have believed she'd been crying if I hadn't watched her less than 14 hours ago check her own reflection in a restaurant window and ask her brother how devastated she looked. Donovan walked slightly ahead of her, the black leather briefcase in his left hand. His face was composed into an expression of controlled sorrow, the look of a son doing something painful but necessary. He wore it like a costume and wore it well. Rourke was to his right, broader and less controlled jaw, working like he was chewing on something, eyes scanning the hallway until they landed on me. For exactly 3 seconds, neither of us moved. Rourke's jaw stopped working. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not guilt, not quite, something more like the flash of recalibration a person does when a variable they believed was removed from the equation walks back in. Then Donovan saw me, and his expression did something I had not expected. It didn't crack. It didn't shift into anger or panic. It simply settled, became more deliberate, like a man who had prepared for this contingency and was now activating that preparation. "Dad," he said, moving toward me. I stood up from the bench. "Don't," I said. The single word came out of me with a quiet force that surprised even me. Not a shout, not a tremor, just a word placed in the air between us, like a door being closed. Donovan stopped walking. Aldrich Crane materialized from around the corner. A moment later, his leather document folio tucked under one arm. He was 60 years old, trim and silver-haired, with a face built for projecting trustworthiness, the kind of face that had spent decades in rooms where people signed things without reading them because Aldrich Crane had told them everything was in order. He had sat at my dinner table. He had drafted my first will. He had shaken my hand at my wife's funeral and told me she would have been proud of the family she left behind. When his eyes found mine across the hallway, something moved in his expression that I couldn't entirely name. Not fear, not guilt either, not exactly. Something more complicated. Something that looked for just a fraction of a second, like a man who had made a calculation years ago and was only now standing in this hallway, beginning to wonder if the math had been right. Then his professional mask came back down smooth and complete, and he looked away. Nolan Price arrived at 8:44, tall, lean, with silver-streaked hair, and the unhurried walk of someone who had been in high-stakes rooms so many times that urgency had become simply another tool rather than a sensation. He shook my hand once firm, and Brief assessed the hallway in a single sweeping glance and leaned close to speak in a low voice. "I've filed the emergency appearance and a motion to contest on grounds of insufficient evidence of incapacity," he said. "The video you recorded, I've reviewed it. Faces are identifiable and the briefcase is visible, but individual documents cannot be read from that angle or in that lighting. It supports the narrative, Raymond. It does not stand alone. That is why everything else matters. Judge Wren will have the filing on her desk before we enter. We're not trying to win today. We're trying to stop her from granting the temporary order. We're not trying to win today, Raymond. We're trying to stop her from granting the temporary order. What are our chances?" He considered this with the honesty I had always paid him for. "Reasonable. Wren doesn't like granting ex parte orders when the respondent is present and represented. The fact that you're standing here coherent and lawyered up works against their narrative." He glanced briefly at Aldrich across the hallway. "Their entire petition rests on demonstrating that you're incapable of managing your own affairs. You just need to look like what you are, a man who knows exactly what is happening to him." The hearing lasted 38 minutes. Aldrich presented the petition a psychiatric evaluation signed by a Dr. Gerald Moss, citing alleged episodes of confusion, erratic financial decision-making, and inability to manage daily affairs. He cited the emergency nature of the filing on grounds that Raymond Holt had allegedly transferred substantial assets to unknown parties in recent weeks and had become a danger to his own estate. Nolan contested each point with clean, precise language, noting that no independent medical evaluation had been conducted, that the psychiatric letter was signed by a physician with no documented history of treating me, and that the alleged financial transfers cited in the petition did not match Raymond Holt's actual account records as of that morning. Judge Patricia Wren, a compact woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, and an expression that suggested she had seen every variation of family dysfunction the Cook County legal system could produce, listened to both sides without interruption. Then she set down her pen. "The court finds insufficient basis to grant a temporary guardianship order at this time," she said, her voice measured and entirely without drama. "The petition raises questions that warrant a full evidentiary hearing. I am granting a 14-day continuance. Both parties are ordered to submit supporting documentation within 7 days. Mr. Holt is to remain under no restrictions pending the full hearing." She looked over her glasses at Aldrich. "Counsel, I would strongly suggest your documentation be in considerably better order by the 30th. Aldrich's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Almost. Donovan, seated 2 rows behind me, said nothing. but I felt his eyes on the back of my neck, the entire walk out of that courtroom, steady, unblinking, and cold, in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. We had 14 days. Hargrove had 48 hours. Something had to break first. Nolan's conference room on the 23rd floor of a building on South Wacker Drive smelled of old leather and climate-controlled air. The kind of room where people came to discuss things they couldn't afford to discuss anywhere else. He offered it without being asked, handing me a key card in the courthouse parking structure, and saying only, "Don't go home, Raymond. Not yet." I ordered coffee I didn't drink and sat watching the minutes move. Hargrove called at 11:17. "I pulled the corporate registry at 4 this morning," he said before I could speak. "Before you even walked through my door, I already had a feeling about Crane. Listen carefully, what I'm about to tell you is going to change the shape of everything you thought you understood about the last 2 years of your life." "Go ahead," I said. Holt Legacy, LLC was incorporated December 4th, 2022. The registered agent on file with the Illinois Secretary of State is not Donovan, not Rourke, not Sabrina. A pause precisely long enough to land. The registered agent is a paralegal named Owen Darby, who has worked exclusively for Aldrich Crane for 11 years. The coffee cup went slightly out of focus. "Aldrich," I said. "Aldrich," Hargrove confirmed. "Donovan provided the greed. Aldrich provided the architecture. This shell company was built 14 months before your children ever walked into that restaurant." I set my hand flat on the table. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago spread in every direction, glass and steel, and the distant gray line of Lake Michigan, enormous and utterly unconcerned. "Why," the word came out scraped thin, "he's billed my family for 9 years. Why would he—" "Because 9 years ago," Hargrove said, "Aldrich Crane nearly lost his license. In spring 2015, a retired physician named Dr. Warren Selby filed a formal bar complaint against Aldrich alleging mismanagement of a trust fund valued at $1.4 million, fees redirected to a personal account, falsified billing records. The Illinois ARDC investigated and found professional misconduct. Aldrich was suspended 90 days, placed on 2 years of monitored probation. He was not disbarred because someone had submitted a character reference letter attesting to his professional integrity. That letter had been signed by Raymond Holt. I remembered writing it, 20 minutes in my library, Aldrich sitting across from me, visibly shaken, asking me to speak to his character. I had said yes without hesitation and never thought about it again. "He's been carrying that debt 9 years, Hargrove said. Somewhere along the way he stopped seeing it as a debt and started seeing it as a liability. I stood because sitting had become physically impossible. My throat tightened until I had to work to keep my voice level. "He sat at my wife's funeral," I said. My voice cracked on the last word despite everything. I hated the rawness of it, hated that grief and fury ran at the same temperature, and I couldn't separate them. "Raymond," Hargrove's voice carried a weight underneath the precision that hadn't been there before. "There's something else. The way Aldrich has structured his own documentation, careful, methodical, almost protective of certain paper trails. In my experience, that kind of carefulness doesn't happen when a man fully trusts his partners." I turned from the window. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying a man who builds a legal trap usually makes sure he has a way out if it springs wrong." A pause. "I think Aldrich may not have been entirely honest with Donovan about everything he was keeping. I didn't understand the full shape of it yet, but it settled into the back of my mind like a splinter, small, specific, impossible to ignore." "Keep going," I said. "That's exactly what I intend to do. Before I reveal who actually built the shell company, designed to take everything from, me drop the number 9 in the comments right now, so I know you are still with me. Because what comes next is the moment this entire story shifts direction. A small note, some elements of this story are fictional, crafted for reflection and meaningful storytelling. If that is not something you wish to continue with, this is your moment to step away, and that is completely okay." I had been staring at the same page of Nolan's legal brief for 40 minutes without reading a single word when my phone buzzed against the conference table and skittered 2 inches to the left, the way phones do, when a message arrives with a particular kind of urgency. A text from Hargrove, 4 words. "Call me, use Signal." Signal was an encrypted messaging application that left no readable trace on standard carrier logs. Hargrove had mentioned it during our first meeting, handing me a card with a username. At the time, I had thought it was the caution of a man who valued professional privacy. Now I understood it was the caution of a man who had found something he didn't want traveling through unsecured channels. He answered in under 10 seconds. A contact of mine, someone in building services at Willis Tower, reached out 2 hours ago. Hargrove said each word placed with the deliberateness of a man carrying something fragile. He performs routine IT maintenance on the 42nd floor. 3 weeks ago, Aldrich's associates asked him to install an encrypted storage partition on the office server, air-gapped, no external internet connection, physically accessible only from within the office. I said nothing. I was listening with the focused attention of someone who knows they are about to hear something that cannot be unheard. The partition was labeled ACR-audio, Hargrove said. Audio files Raymond, not documents, audio. The conference room went very still. He's been recording them, I said. Illinois is a one-party consent state under 720. EILCS 5/14-2. Any participant can legally record conversations without informing others. If Aldrich recorded every planning session with your children, what sits on that server is potentially the most complete account of this conspiracy that exists. I pressed my hand against the table edge, needing something solid. Why record his own co-conspirators? Because Aldrich has already lost a bar license once. Hargrove said, his voice carrying the flat precision of someone describing another person's fear. He knew the same ruthlessness Donovan directed at you could be redirected at him. So he built an exit recordings that gave him something to bargain with if everything went wrong. A pause. He protected himself by documenting the crime. Can we get them? Not directly. My contact cannot remove files without authorization. That constitutes unauthorized access under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. But Nolan can file an emergency motion for expedited discovery. A subpoena compelling production combined with a litigation hold notice means Aldrich cannot destroy them. Destroying evidence after receiving a litigation hold is obstruction of justice under 18 U.S.C. 1519, a federal felony. Hargrove paused. My read is he won't destroy them. Those recordings are the only protection he has. I called Nolan immediately, a short silence on his end, an experienced attorney restructuring his approach around new information. An air-gapped server, Nolan said. Smart, paranoid, but smart. If those recordings contain what Hargrove believes, the petition discussions, the forgery, the transfers, we don't just have a defense. We have the foundation of a criminal referral to the Cook County State's attorney. File it, I said. Ip filing now. And Raymond, if Aldrich contacts you before the subpoena is served, say nothing. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, afternoon light angled differently across the skyline, longer, lower, the particular gold of a late Monday in June that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. Then I remembered something Hargrove had mentioned almost in passing. Rourke had behaved differently from his siblings in every planning session, more guarded, less willing to speak freely in front of Aldrich. At 2 separate meetings, he had stepped outside rather than discuss certain specifics in the room. I had filed it away as personality. Rourke was always the most volatile, the least patient. But sitting in this borrowed conference room, I turned that detail over like a coin. Why would a man be careful about what he said in front of his own co-conspirator? The question followed me into the elevator and down through the lobby and onto the street, quiet, persistent, like a door that hadn't been fully closed. The afternoon had turned the color of old brass by the time I made it back to the hotel on East Illinois Street that Nolan had quietly booked under his firm's account. A clean, anonymous room on the 11th floor, with a view of nothing in particular, which was exactly what I needed. No lake forest, no familiar furniture, no rooms that held the memory of people I had trusted. I had barely set my jacket over the back of the desk chair when my phone rang. Not Signal this time. A direct call which told me Hargrove had assessed whatever he was about to say as something that could travel on a standard line. "Are you sitting down?" he asked. "I'm standing," I said. "I'll manage." Rourke has been recording them. I did not say anything for a moment. I stood in the middle of a hotel room in downtown Chicago and let those 5 words rearrange everything I thought I already understood about the conspiracy that had been built around me. Recording who, I asked, though I already suspected. All of them. Donovan, Sabrina, Aldrich, every planning session, every strategy meeting, every phone call he could capture. Hargrove's voice carried the particular flatness of a man who had learned long ago not to editorialize on human behavior, no matter how extreme. He's been running his own parallel documentation of this entire scheme, independent of Aldrich, independent of Donovan. He's been doing it from the beginning. How did you find this? I've had eyes on Rourke's movements since this morning, Hargrove said. Standard surveillance, nothing invasive, all public spaces. This afternoon, he made a stop at a self-storage facility on North Cicero Avenue, Unit 147. He went in with a backpack and came out 12 minutes later without it. After he left, I made some inquiries. A contact of mine was at the facility that week installing a security camera for the building's management company. He had a direct sightline to Unit 147 during the 12 minutes Rourke was inside. Rourke never looked back. A pause. The unit is registered under the name of a limited liability company called RKH Consulting. RKH Rourke Kenneth Holt. He didn't even change his initials. Despite everything, a sound escaped me that wasn't quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one, the involuntary response of a man confronted with the specific absurdity of his second son, using his own initials to hide evidence of his plan to blackmail his own brother. "What's in the unit?" I asked. Based on what my contact observed when Rourke briefly opened the bag to check the contents before storing it, a laptop at minimum 2 external hard drives, and what appeared to be a small wireless recording device of the type that can be concealed in a pen or a shirt button. Hargrove let that land. He wasn't just recording conversations for his own protection. The volume of storage he's carrying suggests he's been doing this systematically, comprehensively. I moved to the window and looked out at the street 11 floors below, where the early evening traffic was beginning to thicken. Headlights coming on in the amber dusk. My brain was performing a kind of rapid architectural revision, taking the structure of the conspiracy I had understood this morning and rebuilding it around this new load-bearing fact. "He doesn't trust Donovan," I said. "He never did," Hargrove said. "Think about what you know about your son Raymond. Rourke is not a planner. He's not patient in the way Donovan is patient. He went along with this scheme because the money was real and the opportunity was there, but a man like Rourke doesn't hand that much power to his older brother without keeping something in reserve." A brief pause. "My read is that he intended to use the footage after the guardianship was secured. Once your estate was under court-controlled management and the transfers were in motion, he would have approached Donovan and Aldrich with a very simple proposition: pay him a larger share, or the recordings become a problem." The word for what Rourke had been planning settled into my mind with quiet precision. Not conspiracy, not just fraud, extortion. He had walked into his brother's scheme and simultaneously constructed his own nested inside it like a second trap built inside the first. "They've been watching each other," I said. "The entire time," Hargrove confirmed. Aldrich recording the siblings to protect himself from Donovan. Rourke recording everyone to protect himself from Aldrich and Donovan, he paused. "I don't know yet what Donovan has been keeping, but I would be genuinely surprised if the answer is nothing." I pressed my forehead briefly against the cool glass of the window. Outside, Chicago continued its evening routines, with magnificent indifference restaurants filling cabs, turning someone on the sidewalk, below walking a large dog that kept stopping to investigate a fire hydrant with tremendous enthusiasm. The ordinary machinery of a city that didn't know or care that somewhere inside it, a family was eating itself alive. "Can we get the footage?" I asked. "Not through my channels," Hargrove said. "The storage unit is private property, but if Captain Strickland's team can establish probable cause, the surveillance record of Rourke's visit, the LLC registration under his initials, the context of an active fraud investigation, they can apply for a search warrant. Illinois Code of Criminal Procedure, 725 ILCS 5/108-3. If the warrant is granted, law enforcement can retrieve the contents of that unit and enter them into evidence through proper chain of custody. That means bringing Strickland in." "It means beginning to bring Strickland in," Hargrove said carefully. "We're not ready for a full briefing yet. We don't have enough of the picture assembled, but we're getting close." Another pause. "Raymond, I want you to understand something. What we have now, the shell company records, the ARDC history, the subpoena for Aldrich's audio server, and the surveillance documentation of Rourke's storage unit, this is no longer a thin file. This is a case. It's not complete yet, but it has shape. It has direction. I turned away from the window. My back ached from a night without sleep and a day spent in conference rooms and courthouses and hotel rooms carrying the weight of a betrayal that kept revealing new layers every few hours like something geological, not a wound, but a fault line deep and branching. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Rest," he said, which was not the answer I expected. "You're no good to this investigation running on empty. I have 2 more threads I'm pulling tonight. I'll have more for you tomorrow morning. And Raymond," he paused. "I noticed something today while I was tracking Rourke's movements. He made 2 stops I can account for. But there was a 3rd location earlier in the day on the north side. Not his apartment, not Donovan's office. I haven't identified it yet." "What kind of location?" "That's what I'm going to find out," he said. "Get some rest. I'll call you at 7. The call ended at 6:48. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in the gathering dark, too exhausted to move, too wired to sleep, and thought about 3 people who had shared my name and my table, and apparently a profound inability to trust anyone, including each other. Aldrich had been watching Donovan. Rourke had been watching all of them. And somewhere on the north side of Chicago, there was a location I didn't yet have a name for. I set an alarm for 6:30 and lay back on top of the covers without taking off my shoes. The ceiling was white and entirely featureless, and I stared at it until somewhere in the blurred territory between exhaustion and unconsciousness, the city outside finally went quiet. I was back on my feet by 6:35, face-washed shoes, already on from the night before. Hargrove called at 7 on the dot. "Dorothy Kane," he said without greeting. "Head chef at Belmore. She was working the kitchen on Father's Day. My contact tells me she heard everything Eli heard, and she's willing to talk." "Miriam Cross controls access to the building," I said. "Then you need to speak with Miriam first." A pause. "Raymond, the restaurant's surveillance system covers the private dining room corridor and the rear exit. If that footage is still on their servers, most commercial systems retain 30 days. It shows everything. Your departure through the back door, the brothers' setup, the police arrival." His voice tightened slightly. "That footage combined with Aldrich's audio recordings and Rourke's device is a 3-layer evidentiary package. Get it preserved today." I was in a cab heading south on Michigan Avenue by 7:20. Belmore Steakhouse looked entirely different at 9 in the morning, quieter, smaller. Somehow the dining room chairs still upturned on tables, the overhead lights low and functional rather than warm. The smell of last night's service clung faintly to the air. Wood smoke butter, something citrus from the bar. Miriam Cross was at the host stand reviewing reservation sheets when I walked in. She was a compact woman in her early 50s, dark hair pulled back severely, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked up, recognized me immediately, and something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly, but a careful measuring attention. "Mr. Holt," she said. She did not smile, but her voice carried a quiet steadiness that told me she had already been thinking about what happened in this restaurant 6 nights ago. "I need to speak with Dorothy Kane," I said, "and I need to ask you about your surveillance system." She studied me for a moment. Then she set down her reservation clipboard, removed her reading glasses entirely, and said, "Come with me." The kitchen at 9 a.m. was a different world from its dinner service stainless steel surfaces, gleaming prep work, just beginning the organized calm before the controlled storm of service. Dorothy Kane stood at the far end near the walk-in refrigerators, reviewing a delivery manifest. She was a broad-shouldered woman of 55, with close-cropped silver hair and the unhurried confidence of someone who had run professional kitchens for 3 decades. She looked up when Miriam brought me in, and she didn't seem surprised either. "I wondered when someone would come," she said. She set down the manifest and crossed her arms, not defensively, but in the way of a woman settling in to say something she had been holding. "I heard them, Mr. Holt, the 3 of them and the lawyer. I was checking the cold storage unit in the corridor adjacent to the private room. The ventilation duct runs directly along that wall. Sound carries." "Oh, what did you hear?" I asked. "Enough." Her jaw tightened slightly. The lawyer, the older one, silver hair, was talking about a court filing. Something about a judge in a 48-hour window. Your son, the eldest, kept saying, "By the time he realizes it'll already be done." And the woman? Dorothy paused. She was talking about what she'd do with the Lake Forest property, whether she'd sell it or keep it. My chest contracted sharply around something I couldn't name. Sabrina had been discussing the Lake Forest villa, my home, the house where her mother had died, before I had even left the building. Eli heard it too. Dorothy continued, her voice dropping slightly. "He was collecting linens from that same corridor. He heard it before I did. He's the one who wrote the note." She looked at me directly. "He didn't hesitate, didn't ask me what to do, didn't wait. He just folded that napkin and walked straight into the room and put it under your coffee cup. I watched him do it." Something moved across her face, a quiet, fierce respect. 26 years old, making $12 an hour, and he did what most people in this city would never have the nerve to do. My throat tightened. I managed a nod. Miriam, who had been standing quietly near the kitchen entrance, spoke up. "The surveillance system." She pulled a folded paper from her jacket pocket. She had clearly prepared this before I arrived. "We run a 30-day retention cycle. The Father's Day footage is intact. Cameras cover the private dining room entrance, the main corridor, and the rear exit." She handed me the paper. "This is the system vendor's contact information and our footage access authorization. I've already called our attorney this morning and asked for a preservation hold. Nothing will be deleted." I stared at the paper in my hand. "You called your attorney before I even arrived." "I called him Sunday night," Miriam said quietly. The moment I understood what had happened in my restaurant. She met my eyes without flinching. What those people did using my dining room, my staff, my tables to stage something like that, her voice carried a controlled fury that I recognized because I had been living inside my own version of it for 5 days. I wanted on record that Belmore Steakhouse cooperated fully with any legal proceeding. I thanked her. The word felt entirely insufficient. Dorothy walked me back through the kitchen toward the exit, and at the door she stopped and said, almost quietly enough to be talking to herself, "Eli hasn't come back to work since that night, you know. Called in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Miriam's holding his position." She looked at me steadily. "Whatever happened to him before this, whatever his reasons were, he made the right call. I thought you should know that a person like that exists." I stepped out through the kitchen's rear door, into the same alley I had stood in 6 nights ago. The same brick walls, the same smell of the city in the morning. The paper with the surveillance system information was folded in my jacket pocket. Whatever Eli's reasons were, Dorothy had said it like there was a story behind the words, something specific, something she knew but hadn't said. I intended to find out what it was. Hargrove sent me the address at 953, a text on Signal, just a street number on West Diversey Avenue in Logan Square, no explanation needed. I took a cab north through the mid-morning traffic, watching the city change character block by block, the glass towers of downtown giving way to 2 flats and corner stores and maple trees whose roots had buckled the sidewalks into uneven waves. The building was a 3-story walk-up older brick, a small concrete stoop with an iron railing painted black. 2 bicycles were locked to the railing. A child's rain boot, just one bright yellow, sat beside the front door, as though its owner had simply stepped out of it mid-stride and kept walking. I rang the buzzer for apartment 2B. A long pause, then a voice cautious, younger than I expected. "Who is it?" "Raymond Holt," I said. "You helped me last Sunday. I'd like to talk if you're willing." Another pause, longer this time. Then the door clicked open. Eli Marsh was 26 years old, slight and dark-haired, with the kind of face that looked like it had learned to be careful not closed, but measured the way a person gets when they have had to think twice before trusting. He was wearing a gray sweatshirt and holding a dish towel, which suggested I had interrupted something ordinary and domestic. He looked at me for a moment from the apartment doorway, and then he stepped aside to let me in, without saying anything further. The apartment was small and clean and unmistakably lived in. A child's drawings taped to the refrigerator, a pair of small sneakers by the door, a coloring book open on the coffee table beside a cup of crayons. From somewhere down the short hallway came the sound of a cartoon playing at low volume. "My daughter," Eli said, noticing me, noticed the sneakers. "Claire, she's 8. He gestured toward the small kitchen table. "Sit down, Mr. Holt." We sat across from each other at a table that had a water ring stain on one corner and a small plastic dinosaur standing in the middle of it that neither of us moved. "How did you know?" I asked. "When you wrote that note, how did you know what they were planning?" Eli set the dish towel on the table. His hands were steady, but something in his jaw tightened briefly. "Because I recognized him," he said. "Your son, Donovan." He said the name, the way you say something that has a bad taste. "I've known who he is for 3 years. He told me the story without dramatics in the flat, factual tone of someone who has processed something painful for long enough that the rawness has become simply the shape of a memory. 3 years ago, Eli had been working 2 jobs, Belmore on weekends, a construction supply company during the week, and putting aside money to open a small business. A food truck, he said. Nothing elaborate. He had a menu planned, a name picked out, a location scouted on the north side. He had saved $41,000 over 4 years. He had been approached by a man named Preston Wolf, a financial consultant who moved through Chicago's mid-level investment circles with a particular kind of confident ease. Wolf had presented an opportunity, a short-term real estate development fund that promised 18% returns in under a year. Minimum investment, $30,000. The fund was affiliated, Wolf said, with a private equity group, whose lead partner was a prominent Chicago businessman. That businessman was Donovan Holt. Eli had verified what he could. Donovan's name was real. His reputation was real. The company letterhead looked legitimate. Eli had invested $32,000, nearly his entire savings. The fund dissolved 8 months later. The returns never materialized. Preston Wolf became unreachable. The company letterhead traced back to a registered address that was a vacant office suite in Schaumburg. Eli filed a complaint with the Illinois Securities Department. The investigation confirmed the fund had been fraudulent, but could not establish sufficient direct evidence to charge Donovan Holt, who had distanced himself from Wolf's operation through 2 layers of intermediary paperwork. Eli lost the money, lost the food truck, spent the following year working extra shifts to keep the apartment, to keep Claire fed, and in school to keep the yellow rain boot by the front door, instead of wherever it is that dreams go when the money runs out. I never forgot his face, Eli said quietly. When he walked into the private dining room that night with his briefcase, I knew him in 3 seconds. He looked at his hands on the table. I heard what they were saying through the corridor, and I thought. He stopped, exhaled. I thought about what I would have needed 3 years ago, if someone in that room had known what was about to happen to me. He looked up at me. So I wrote the note. From down the hallway, the cartoon went quiet. A moment later, a small girl appeared in the kitchen doorway, dark-haired like her father, wearing a shirt with a cartoon fox on it, regarding me with the direct, unself-conscious curiosity of a child who had not yet learned to pretend she wasn't looking. "Or, Daddy," she said, "who is that man?" "A friend," Eli said. His voice changed when he spoke to her, softer at the edges, the careful quality in his face replaced by something uncomplicated and warm. "Go finish your show, baby. I'll make lunch in a little bit." Claire considered me for another moment with those serious dark eyes. Then she said, with great solemnity, "You have sad eyes," and retreated back down the hallway. Neither of us spoke for a moment after that. My throat was doing something I was working hard to manage. I thought about $41,000 saved over 4 years. I thought about a food truck with a name already picked out. I thought about my son, my eldest son, and the specific practiced ease with which he had inserted himself into a man's dream and quietly emptied it. "Eli," I said when I trusted my voice again, "I want you to know that what you did that night, it wasn't a small thing. You saved me from losing everything I've built." I paused. "And when this is over, when the legal proceedings are done, I want to talk to you about something. Not money, something different." He looked at me steadily, not with hope exactly, but with the careful attention of a man who had learned to wait and see before he decided what to feel. "Okay," he said. Down the hallway, the cartoon started again. Claire laughed at something, a bright, entirely uncalculated sound that moved through that small apartment, like light through a window. I stood to leave, and I was already turning something over in my mind. A building I owned in Logan Square, commercial space on the ground floor, sitting empty for 2 years. I hadn't thought about it in months. I was thinking about it now. Spencer called at 2:15, while I was still on the cab ride back from Logan Square, the city scrolling past the window in the flat gray light of a Tuesday afternoon that had decided somewhere around noon to become overcast. "Craig Dennison wants to meet," Spencer said. He sounded tightly wound, the voice of a man who had been sitting on something uncomfortable and was relieved to finally be able to hand it to someone else. "He called me this morning. He said he's been pulling the account access logs since Sunday night, and he has something you need to see in person. He doesn't want to put it in an email." When I asked, he said, "Whenever you can get to LaSalle Street." "Tell him 3 o'clock, I said. First Midwest Bank occupied the lower 6 floors of a building on LaSalle Street, whose lobby had the particular hushed gravity of institutions that handle other people's money. Marble floors, low voices, the discreet efficiency of people who understood that wealth at its most serious does not make noise. Craig Dennison met me in a private meeting room on the 4th floor. He was 50 years old, broad across the shoulders, with close-cropped brown hair going silver at the temples and the careful, measured manner of a man who had spent his career being precise about things that mattered. He shook my hand, firmly closed the door behind us, and set a manila folder on the table before either of us had sat down. "Mr. Holt," he said, "I want to be direct with you. What I'm about to show you is not something I take lightly. Sharing account access records with an account holder is within my authority. You have every right to this information. But the reason I asked to meet in person rather than send documentation is because what these records show is serious enough that I wanted to look you in the eye when I showed you." I sat down. "Show me," I said. He opened the folder. The first document was a bank access log, 3 pages of time-stamped entries recording every login to Raymond Holt's primary account over the preceding 60 days. Craig walked me through it with a pen, pointing without touching the paper. A standard access pattern: here are your own logins from your usual devices, consistent IP, addresses registered to your Lake Forest residence, and your personal mobile. He moved the pen forward. Then here, June 9th, 2:17 in the morning. He tapped the entry. A login from an IP address registered to a device on the Willis Tower building network, 42nd floor tenant access. Aldrich's floor. The session lasted 11 minutes, Craig continued. During that session, 3 actions were performed. First, account balance and asset summary viewed. Second, a wire transfer instruction was initiated, moving $270,000 to an account registered to Holt Legacy, LLC. He paused. Third, the transfer authorization was completed using a digital signature. He slid the second document across the table. It was a side-by-side comparison, 2 signature images printed in high resolution. The left was labeled Raymond Holt, verified signature on file, March 2024. The right was labeled Transfer Authorization Signature, June 9th, 2024. Even to my untrained eye, the difference was visible. The March signature had a particular hesitation in the capital R, a slight upward hook I had developed in my 30s and never lost. The June signature was smoother, more uniform, competent, but not mine. Our fraud detection system flagged it automatically, Craig said. The signature match scored 61% against your verified signature profile. Our threshold for automatic approval is 85%. It was manually overridden, Craig said. Aldrich's power of attorney on your account had been upgraded to include transaction authorization, privileges and internal classification we reserve for estate attorneys actively managing accounts for elderly clients. That classification gave him override capability within our system. He let that sit. My hands were very still on the table. Who has administrative override access? At the time of this transaction, Craig said carefully, override access was authorized for 3 individuals at this institution, myself, our chief operations officer. He paused. And the holder of a third-party financial power of attorney on your account. He looked at me. Aldrich Crane. The room was very quiet. Somewhere beyond the closed door, the ordinary sounds of a bank, a phone, a printer, a distant conversation continued without any awareness of what was being said in this room. He used his own access code, I said. The specific audacity of it was almost incomprehensible. He didn't even try to hide which account authorized the override. He may have believed the transaction would not be scrutinized closely enough to matter, Craig said. Or he believed that by the time anyone looked, the guardianship proceeding would have established legal control over your estate and the transfer would be retroactively legitimized. He closed the folder. Mr. Holt, I have prepared a sworn affidavit certifying these findings. The unauthorized access, the forged signature, the manual override, and the transfer details. It is ready for your attorney to submit to the court. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected, the specific weight of documented truth. There is one more thing, Craig said. He hesitated briefly, the first hesitation I had seen from him. The same device, the same Willis Tower IP address, accessed 2 other client accounts at this institution on the same night. I cannot disclose whose accounts those are without their consent or a subpoena, but I have flagged them internally and reported the access pattern to our compliance department. He met my eyes. You were not the only one, Mr. Holt. I absorbed that slowly. Aldrich had accessed 2 other accounts on the same night, 2 other clients, 2 other people sitting somewhere in this city who did not yet know that the man they trusted had been inside their financial lives at 2 in the morning. I thanked Craig. I meant it fully, not the social reflex of gratitude, but the real thing, the kind that comes when someone chooses to do the right thing, when the easier option was to file a report quietly and let someone else sort it out. I called Nolan from the elevator. He answered on the first ring. I have Craig Dennison's affidavit, I said. Forged signature manual override code unauthorized access $270,000. It's all documented. A sharp exhale on his end. That's bank fraud under federal statute and forgery under Illinois code. Combined with the guardianship petition, we're looking at a federal case, Raymond, not just a civil matter. A pause. I'm calling the Cook County State's Attorney's Office this afternoon, and I'm copying everything to Captain Strickland. Do it, I said. The elevator opened into the marble lobby. I walked through it and out onto LaSalle Street, the sealed envelope in my jacket pocket, beside the surveillance authorization from Miriam Cross. The overcast sky had thickened while I was inside, the kind of flat, heavy gray that sits over Chicago in June, like a held breath, deciding whether to break into rain. 2 other accounts, 2 other people who didn't know yet. I wondered if Aldrich had any idea how many threads were now being pulled simultaneously, and whether somewhere on the 42nd floor of Willis Tower, he was beginning to feel the first tremor of something coming loose. Hargrove texted at 5. 40 Marcus Bell wants to meet. He's been waiting for a reason to publish. You're it. Longman Bar, North Wells Street, 7 o'clock. I knew the name Marcus Bell, the way you know bylines you've seen attached to stories that make you uncomfortable, the kind of investigative pieces that run on a Sunday and follow you through the week. He had written a 3-part series on predatory estate planning attorneys 2 years ago for a national publication that had resulted in 2 disbarments and a federal investigation. I had read it at the time with the detached interest of someone who believed such things happened to other people. I took a cab to Old Town and arrived 4 minutes early. Longman Bar was a narrow room with exposed brick and low lighting, the kind of place that felt designed for conversations that needed cover. Marcus Bell was already at a corner table when I walked in, lean and sharp-featured early 40s with dark eyes that moved quickly, and a journalist's particular habit of watching everything slightly sideways as though direct observation might cause the subject to behave differently. He stood when he saw me, shook my hand with a firm brevity, and sat back down without small talk. Mr. Holt, he said, I've been building a file on Aldrich Crane for 14 months. He set a thick accordion folder on the table between us. Hargrove called me this morning. What you've uncovered in the last 48 hours fills in 3 gaps I couldn't close on my own. Tell me what you have, I said. He opened the folder. The first case was from 2009. A retired couple in Phoenix, Arizona, Harold and Constance Merritt, had retained Aldrich Crane, then practicing under an Arizona bar license, to manage their estate trust, valued at approximately $800,000. Over 18 months, Aldrich had executed a series of legitimate appearing amendments to the trust structure, gradually shifting trustee authority to a limited liability company he controlled through a nominee director. By the time the Merritts realized what had happened, $230,000 had been transferred to accounts they did not recognize. Aldrich had resigned from the representation before the transfers were discovered. The Arizona State Bar suspended his license. He relocated to Illinois and applied for admission to the Illinois Bar the following year. He disclosed the Arizona suspension on his Illinois Bar application, Marcus said. He was required to, but the Illinois ARDC reviewed it and granted admission anyway, conditional admission with monitoring. That monitoring lapsed after 2 years. He turned a page. The Merritts filed a civil suit. It settled out of court under a confidentiality agreement for an undisclosed amount. No criminal charges were filed. The second case was from 2013. A Chicago area technology entrepreneur named Dale Forsyth had retained Aldrich to structure a complex business succession plan. Aldrich had inserted language into the succession documents that granted a third-party entity again, a nominee-controlled LLC override authority over certain asset transfers in the event of Forsyth's incapacitation. Forsyth had not caught it. When he was hospitalized briefly in 2014 following a cardiac event, the override clause activated and approximately $160,000 moved before Forsyth's family engaged a second attorney who identified the language. If Forsyth went to law enforcement, Marcus said, he paused. He was discouraged from pursuing it. The detective assigned to the initial report closed the case citing insufficient evidence. Forsyth always believed it was closed too quickly. He looked at me steadily. He told me when I interviewed him that someone with connections to the Cook County court system had made it understood that the case was not going to go anywhere. I held that detail without pressing on it. Someone with judicial connections had helped Aldrich make a problem disappear. Marcus had not named that person. Something told me he was not ready to, or perhaps that he wasn't entirely certain. The third case, Marcus continued, is the one your financial aide Spencer Webb almost uncovered independently. A private equity fund operating out of Schaumburg, the same general structure as what Hargrove found with Holt Legacy, LLC. Nominee director, air-gapped financial instruments transfers executed through a third party, insulated from direct connection to Aldrich. He turned to the final section of the folder. That fund is the one connected to Preston Wolf. I looked up sharply. Marcus met my eyes. Wolf worked for Aldrich, he said. Not officially, no employment records, no contracts, but Wolf's phone records, which I obtained through a source at the Illinois Securities Department, show 37 calls to a number registered to Aldrich Crane's personal cell between January and September 2021. He let that land. Eli Marsh was not an isolated victim. Wolf ran the same scheme in at least 4 other cities using the same framework Aldrich provided. Minimum combined losses somewhere north of $900,000 across all victims. The bar noise continued around us, Glass's voices, the low pulse of music from somewhere near the back. I sat in the middle of it and felt something settle into place with a cold, solid weight. Aldrich had not stumbled into fraud. He had not been a good man who made a series of bad decisions under pressure. He had been doing this for 17 years across multiple states in multiple forms, refining the architecture each time, learning from each near miss, growing more careful and more insulated with every iteration. The ARDC complaint I had written a character reference for in 2015 had not been a misunderstanding. It had been a chapter. I want to publish, Marcus said. His voice was direct but not unkind. Not yet. I understand you need the legal proceedings to move first, and I won't jeopardize an active investigation. But when this breaks Mr. Holt, it needs to break completely. Everything Arizona Forsyth, Wolf, your case. The full pattern. He leaned forward slightly. Because the only way men like Aldrich Crane stop is when there is nowhere left to practice. I looked at him across the table. When the legal proceedings are complete, I said, you'll have everything I have. He nodded once. Then he closed the accordion folder and slid it across the table toward me. I carried it out of Longman Bar at 8:12, the night air cooler, now a faint smell of rain on North Wells Street that hadn't arrived yet. 14 months of Marcus Bell's work in my hands, and somewhere behind it, a detail I couldn't stop returning to. Someone with judicial connections had helped close the Forsyth case in 2013. I had been trying not to think too directly about Judge Calloway. About the fact that he had sent me to Hargrove, had known to send me to Hargrove with a speed and precision that suggested he had thought about this moment before it arrived. I wasn't ready to think about it fully yet, but the thought was there quiet and persistent, following me into the cab like a second passenger. I was back at the hotel on East Illinois Street by 9 that night. Marcus Bell's accordion folder open on the desk, beside Spencer's encrypted files and Craig Dennison's sealed affidavit, 3 separate stacks of evidence that had not existed 4 days ago, each one representing someone who had chosen for their own reasons to tell the truth. I slept better than I had any right to. At 8:47 the following morning, Wednesday, a call came from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it on the second ring. Mr. Holt. The voice was brisk and direct, younger than I expected, with the particular economy of someone who had learned to establish credibility quickly, because her age sometimes made people assume she hadn't earned it yet. My name is Detective Nora Walsh. I'm assigned to the Financial Crimes and Fraud Division under Captain Strickland. Your attorney contacted our office yesterday afternoon. I'd like to meet with you this morning if you're available." "I'm available," I said. "I'll come to you," she said. "Wherever you're comfortable." She arrived at the hotel at 9:30. Detective Nora Walsh was at 32 years old, compact and precise in the way of someone who had decided early that she would not take up more space than she needed until she had earned the right to. She wore a dark blazer over a plain white shirt, her badge clipped to her belt, dark hair pulled back. She shook my hand with a direct assessing grip and sat across from me at the small desk in my hotel room, setting a slim case folder on the surface between us. "Captain Strickland briefed me on your attorney's call yesterday," she said. "Before I review what your team has assembled, I want to tell you what I found independently, because I think it's important you understand that this investigation did not begin with your evidence." She opened her folder. "It began with a supplementary report I filed 11 days ago." I looked at her. 11 days ago was before Father's Day." "Yes," she said, "it was." She explained it with the clean, methodical precision of someone who had rehearsed the sequence enough times to know exactly where the weight fell. 3 weeks prior to Father's Day, Walsh had been assigned a routine review of financial fraud complaints filed with the Illinois Securities Department over the preceding 18 months. One complaint, filed by a victim of Preston Wolf's investment scheme in 2021, had referenced a silent partner described only as a senior Chicago attorney with estate planning specialization. The description had not been enough to identify Aldrich at the time, and the complaint had been administratively closed. Walsh had not closed it in her own mind. She had pulled the corporate registry records for every LLC incorporated in Illinois between 2020 and 2023, with nominee directors connected to Willis Tower addresses. Holt Legacy LLC had appeared in those results on June 11th, 5 days before Father's Day. When I saw the registered agent was a paralegal employed by Aldrich Crane, she said, "I flagged it internally and began a preliminary review. I did not yet have enough to open a formal investigation." She paused. Then Father's Day happened. She had been off duty that Sunday evening. When she came in Monday morning and reviewed the overnight reports, she found a brief incident log from Belmore Steakhouse, 3 siblings and a family attorney, requesting a police welfare check on an elderly father allegedly exhibiting signs of mental incapacity. 2 officers had responded, found no subject on premises, and logged the call as inconclusive. Something about the report bothered her, in a specific professional way she had learned over 5 years to take seriously. The welfare check request was made by Donovan Holt at 7:29 p.m., she said. But the reservation at Belmore was under Raymond Holt's name and had been made 6 days earlier. She looked at me. A family concerned about a father's mental deterioration does not make a reservation at a restaurant in his name and then report him missing from that restaurant on the same evening. That sequencing doesn't make behavioral sense. She had pulled the responding officer's body camera footage. Neither camera had captured anything inside the restaurant they had arrived after I had already left, and the brothers had met them in the lobby. But one of the officers, a veteran named Caldwell, had filed a supplementary note 2 days later, flagging that Donovan Holt had provided an account of the evening that contained a specific inconsistency. He had stated that Raymond had left the restaurant before the family arrived, but the reservation log Miriam Cross had provided to the officers showed Raymond's party had been checked in at 6:53, meaning he had been present when the brothers arrived. That supplementary note was filed, logged, and then buried under routine weekend incident reports, Walsh said. Her jaw tightened slightly. "I found it Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, your attorney had called Captain Strickland." She closed her folder. "Mr. Holt, I had been building toward this case for 11 days before your evidence arrived. What your team has assembled doesn't just support what I found, it completes it." I leaned back in my chair. The specific relief of being taken seriously by someone with a badge and a case folder and 5 years of financial fraud experience was something I had not let myself anticipate, and it arrived now with a force that surprised me. "What happens next?" I asked. "Your attorney is meeting with the Cook County State's attorney this afternoon to present the full evidentiary package, Craig Dennison's affidavit, the surveillance footage authorization from Belmore Spencer Webb's financial analysis, and whatever Hargrove's investigation has produced." She paused. "Once the state's attorney reviews and approves, Captain Strickland will apply for search warrants for 3 locations: Aldrich Crane's Willis Tower office, Rourke Holt's self-storage unit on North Cicero Avenue, and the Lake Forest Villa. The villa, I said. My voice came out flat. There may be additional documentation on the premises, she said not unkindly. We need to be thorough. She stood to leave, snapping her case folder closed with the efficient finality of someone moving to the next item on a list that did not get shorter. At the door, she paused, her hand on the frame. One more thing, she said. Officer Caldwell's supplementary note, the one that was buried in the incident reports. She looked at me directly. I've been doing this job for 5 years. Supplementary notes don't bury themselves. Someone has to not prioritize them. A brief pause. I'm looking into how that happened. She left. I sat for a long moment in the quiet of the hotel room, turning that last detail over carefully. A buried supplementary report. A 2013 case closed too quickly. A character with judicial connections who had helped Aldrich before. The threads were not separate anymore. They were becoming the same thread. And that thread led somewhere I had been avoiding looking directly. Tomorrow I was going to have to call Judge Calloway. I called Judge Calloway at 9:15 Thursday morning. He picked up on the first ring, which told me he had been expecting the call, possibly for days. Raymond, he said. His voice carried something I had not heard in it before. Not quite guilt. Something older and more complicated than guilt. The sound of a man who had made a decision he believed was right and had been living with the weight of it ever since. I need to see you, I said. Today. Pause. Come to the house, he said. 11 o'clock. Judge Elias Calloway, retired Cook County Circuit Court. 23 years. On the bench lived in a brownstone on North Astor Street in the Gold Coast, 3 blocks from Lake Michigan. It was a handsome building, old limestone, with deep-set windows and a brass door knocker worn smooth from decades of use. The kind of home that belonged to a man who had spent his life in rooms where serious things were decided. He answered the door himself. He was 71 years old, tall and slightly stooped now at the shoulders, with white hair kept short, and the kind of face that had spent so many years listening to people in courtrooms that it had learned to reveal very little while absorbing everything. He was wearing a cardigan over a collared shirt, and he looked at me with an expression I recognized the look of someone preparing to say something they have rehearsed and still do not feel ready to say. Come in, Raymond, he said. We sat in his study, 2 leather chairs facing each other across a low table, the shelves around us dense with legal volumes and case reporters, and the accumulated paperwork of a career spent parsing the difference between what people did and what the law permitted. He poured coffee without asking whether I wanted it. I wrapped both hands around the mug and waited. I knew, he said. He said it simply without preface, the way a man says something when he has decided that preamble is a form of cowardice. Not everything, not the full structure of it, but I knew something was being built against you. I have known for approximately 3 weeks. The study was very quiet. Tell me, I said. My voice came out level. I was using every reserve I had left to keep it that way. He told me. In the spring of this year, late April, a former colleague of his, a retired attorney named Gerald Pruitt, who had been peripherally involved in the Forsyth matter in 2013, had contacted Calloway with a concern. Pruitt had encountered Aldrich Crane at a professional function and had overheard a conversation, partial fragmentary, in which Aldrich had referenced a forthcoming estate matter involving a prominent Chicago family and a competency petition. Pruitt had not caught enough detail to be certain of what he was hearing, but he knew Aldrich's history, and he knew Raymond Holt's name when he heard it. Pruitt had called Calloway because he did not know who else to call. Calloway had listened. He had considered going directly to Raymond. He had ultimately decided not to. Why? I asked. The single word came out of me with a quietness that was more dangerous than anger. Calloway set down his coffee cup. He looked at me with the steady, unflinching directness of a man who had decided he owed the truth without mitigation. Because I know you, Raymond. I have known you for 30 years. And I know that if I had come to you in April and said your children may be planning something against you, with nothing concrete, nothing provable, nothing but the second-hand account of a partial conversation, you would not have believed me. He paused. You would have defended them. You would have found an explanation. You would have gone to Donovan and told him what you'd heard, and the moment you did that, they would have accelerated everything or abandoned it entirely, and you would never have had the evidence to prove what they intended. I stared at him. Something was happening in my chest, that I did not have a clean name for a pressure building, and building that was partly fury and partly grief, and partly the specific shattering recognition that he was not entirely wrong. So you let it happen, I said. I pointed you toward Hargrove the moment it did, he said quietly. You let them take me out of that restaurant. You let them file the petition. You let me spend 4 days running across this city trying to build a case that you could have helped me build in April. My voice cracked on the last word, a clean break, like something under too much pressure finally giving way. I set the coffee mug down on the table because my hands had started shaking and I did not want them to. Elias, you sat at my wife's funeral. You have been in my home. You are the person I called when I needed someone to trust. His face did something complicated and painful. Yes, he said. I know. And you said nothing. I said nothing, he confirmed. He did not look away, did not qualify it, did not reach for the justification he had clearly prepared and then set aside. He simply held my gaze with the unflinching steadiness of a man accepting exactly what was being said to him, and it was somehow worse than if he had argued. I stood up from the chair. I walked to the window that looked out over North Astor Street, the quiet Gold Coast morning, a woman pushing a stroller, 2 men in suits walking briskly, a city going about its business with complete indifference to what was fracturing inside this study. I stood there for a long time, long enough that the shaking in my hands gradually stilled, long enough for the pressure in my chest to shift from something breaking to something hardening. 60 years old, 4 days without a real home, 3 children who had spent 2 years building a machine to strip everything from me. A lawyer I had defended who had used my trust as raw material. A judge I had known for 30 years who had watched the trap being set and calculated that the kindest thing he could do was let me walk into it with my eyes open. I could collapse. I understood in that moment exactly how a person collapses, how the weight becomes simply too distributed across too many points of origin to bear upright. I chose not to. I turned back from the window. The search warrants, I said. My voice was steady. Nolan is meeting with the state's attorney today. They're moving on 3 locations. I looked at Calloway directly. When this goes to court, and it will go to court, I will need every piece of information Pruitt gave you, documented, sworn, on the record. Calloway nodded once. You'll have it, he said, and Elias. I held his gaze for a moment longer. When this is over, you and I are going to have a longer conversation about what 30 years of friendship actually means. He nodded again. Something moved across his face, not relief, not absolution, but the particular expression of a man who knows he has not been forgiven and understands he has not earned it yet. My phone buzzed as I reached the study door. A text from Nolan State's attorney approved. Warrants issued. Strickland executing tomorrow morning. Be ready. I read it twice. Then I put the phone in my pocket and walked out of Judge Calloway's brownstone into the Gold Coast. Morning the sun sharp and specific on North Astor Street, everything suddenly very clear. Tomorrow, before I take you inside that house on the morning, everything finally came apart. Comment still here below. And let me know you made it this far, because what Raymond walks into next is the moment he has been fighting toward since the night a stranger slipped a napkin under his coffee cup. A small note portions of this story contain fictional elements shaped carefully for education and emotional depth. If this is not the content you are looking for today, no judgment at all. You are welcome to step away here and return whenever you are ready. Captain Strickland called at 5:58 Friday morning, while the sky outside the hotel window was still the deep blue gray of a city not quite ready to become day. We're moving in 40 minutes, he said. 3 teams, 3 locations, simultaneous execution. I want you at the Lake Forest address by 8 o'clock after we've secured the premises, not before. Is that understood? And understood, I said. Mr. Holt, stay in the vehicle until Walsh signals you. This is a warrant execution, not a confrontation. I told him I understood that too. Whether I entirely meant it was a separate question. Detective Walsh met me at the edge of the driveway at 8:12. Willis Tower team has secured Crane's office, she said quietly. Federal agents pulled in the FBI's financial crimes unit. Crane was present. He did not resist. He asked for his attorney immediately. A pause. Rourke's devices are in evidence custody. 2 hard drives, 1 laptop, the wireless recording unit. Chain of custody is clean. She looked at me directly. The Villa team found a second set of forged psychiatric evaluations and handwritten notes in Donovan's own writing referencing the guardianship timeline. He kept notes, I said, in his own handwriting. In his own study, she confirmed. They were in the main sitting room. the room where we had gathered every Christmas morning for 20 years, where my wife had arranged flowers on the mantelpiece every spring. Donovan sat in the armchair nearest the fireplace, hands on his knees, his face arranged into composed dignity, the last refuge of a man whose other options had been removed. Rourke was on the sofa, jaw-working eyes moving between the officers with the restless energy of someone running calculations that no longer added up. Sabrina stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself, composure fractured at the edges in ways no amount of preparation could repair. Then Donovan looked at me directly, steadily, the expression of a man who has lost and decided the only remaining move is to refuse to show it. "Dad," he said. I said. Rourke exhaled sharply. "It's done, Donovan," he said, voice rough and uneven. "Look around. It's done." Sabrina's eyes were red, genuinely this time, no performance behind them. "Dad," she started. "Not now, Sabrina," I said quietly. Walsh read them their rights with clean, unambiguous precision. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder financial abuse, forgery, filing false police reports. Each charge arrived in that room like the closing of a door that had been open far too long. I watched Donovan stand and place his hands behind his back. I watched Rourke follow, shoulders rigid with the only dignity he had left. Sabrina walked past me in the doorway, and for one moment her hand brushed my arm, not grasping, not asking. Just the ghost of something she remembered used to mean more than it did now. I did not call after them. Walsh reappeared. "The guardianship petition will be dismissed automatically upon criminal indictment. The 14-day hearing, Sapol. Meidas Beaurst. Moot," I said before she could. Outside, the June morning was enormous and green and entirely indifferent. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a building on a street in Logan Square sat empty and waiting. But that was tomorrow's work. 8 days after a folded napkin changed everything, I walked back into Belmore Steakhouse at 9 in the morning with a folder tucked under my arm and something close to peace settling in my chest for the first time in what felt like a very long year. Eli was already there. He sat at a corner table near the window, hands folded, wearing a clean, dark jacket that told me he understood this meeting mattered. Beside him in a chair pulled close sat Claire, yellow sweater, serious eyes watching me cross the room with the focused attention of a child who knows something important is about to happen, even without all the words for it. I sat across from them and set the folder on the table. "I told you it wouldn't be money," I said. Eli nodded slowly, his eyes moving to the folder. I opened it. Inside was a single document, a 10-year lease agreement for the ground floor commercial space at a building I owned on West Armitage Avenue in Logan Square, 1,200 square feet, a prep kitchen already installed, a serving window facing the street, boarded up for 2 years and ready to be opened. Annual rent $1. Eli stared at the document for a long moment without speaking. I watched something move through his face, a sequence of emotions arriving faster than he could organize them, each one visible and unguarded in a way I had not seen from him before. His jaw tightened. He pressed his lips together. His hands still folded on the table gripped each other once hard. "This is a location," I said quietly, "permanent, yours. What Donovan took from you was $32,000 and a dream. This gives the dream back without the debt." Eli looked up. His eyes were bright and steady and full of something he was working very hard not to let spill over. "Raymond," he said, and then stopped because the sentence had nowhere to go that words were adequate for. Claire leaned forward in her chair and looked at me with those serious dark eyes. "Is my dad getting his restaurant?" The directness of it, 8 years old, cutting straight to the only question that mattered, did something to my chest I was entirely unprepared for. "Yes," I said. "Your dad is getting his restaurant." She turned to Eli with complete satisfaction. "I told you," she said. Eli laughed, a broken, genuine, uncontrolled sound that filled the quiet dining room, and asked nothing of anyone. He pressed one hand briefly over his mouth. Then he straightened, looked at me, and said simply, "Thank you." I walked out onto North Michigan Avenue at 9:47 into a June morning that had decided to be beautiful. The lake was visible at the end of the cross streets, the city moving around me, indifferent and enormous and entirely mine. A 26-year-old man had picked up a pen 8 days ago and written 6 words he had no guarantee would matter. They had mattered. If there is one thing this family story taught me, trust is not something you give freely to everyone who shares your last name. I trusted too easily. I believed blood meant loyalty. I believed years meant honesty. I was wrong, and that wrongness nearly cost me everything I had spent a lifetime building. Do not be like me. Pay attention to the rooms people go quiet in. The signs are always there. My personal opinion. The most dangerous family betrayal is not the one that takes your money. It is the one that makes you question whether your entire life was built on something real. But I also believe what I was once taught, that God does not always remove the storm. Sometimes He simply places the right stranger in the room before it arrives. That stranger for me was a young man with a pen and $12 an hour and more courage than people with far more ever manage. Every family betrayal leaves a mark. Every family story leaves a lesson. This one left both. If this family story moved something in, you share it with someone who needs it. Leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel. There are more stories coming that might just change the way you see the people closest to you. Thank you for staying until the very end. A gentle warning: upcoming stories contain fictional elements built for reflection and education. If that is not for you today, no judgment. Choose what serves you best and come back when you are ready.